A woman vanishes in the middle of the ocean. Her husband surfaces alone at 4 in the morning, quietly slipping through the shadows of a boatyard, not screaming her name, not pounding on doors, not sobbing into the hands of a stranger, just moving, calmly, quietly, as if he already knew she wasn't coming back. 61 days later, federal divers are breaking through the hull of an abandoned barge with a hammer. A cadaver dog is pushing through thick Bahamian mangroves in the rain, and the GPS data from his own device is telling a story that his mouth never did. This is not a story about a tragic accident at sea. This is a story about what the water knows and what it has been holding on to. Viewer discretion advised. This episode contains details of a missing persons case being investigated as a possible murder. The content discussed may be distressing to some viewers. Please take care of yourselves as we go through this together. If you are new here, welcome to Kyrie and Wilson. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a single update as this case develops. Drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. And if this case has already been on your mind, like this video and share it, because the more eyes on this story, the better. Let's get into it. April 4th, 2026. Hopetown, Elbow Cay, Abaco Islands, Bahamas. The water was dark, the night was quiet, and somewhere out in the Sea of Abaco, a 55-year-old Michigan woman who called the ocean her happy place took her last known breath above it. Her name was Lynette Hooker. She was an experienced sailor, not a tourist, not someone unfamiliar with open water at night. A woman who had spent years on the ocean, who documented her life on it, who chose it deliberately. That detail matters, because the story her husband would tell about what happened that night depends entirely on you believing that a woman like that simply fell off a boat and disappeared. That husband is Brian Hooker, 58, her partner of approximately 25 years. And the night of April 4th is where his version of events begins to pull apart at the seams. Here is what we know. The couple had spent the evening at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown. At approximately 7:30 in the evening, they left together on an 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy, heading across the water toward their anchored yacht, the Soulmate, sitting in Aunt Pat's Bay. A short trip, a familiar route, one they had made before. Brian's account is this. Rough water caused Lynette to fall overboard. She was holding the engine safety key when she went in, which caused the dinghy's engine to cut off automatically. He says he threw a flotation device toward her. He says the currents drove them apart. He says he lost sight of her and could not get back to her. And then he paddled, for hours, he says, alone in the dark, on an 8-foot dinghy, across open water. He did not reach the Marsh Harbour boatyard until approximately 4 o'clock the following morning. That is more than 8 hours after Lynette reportedly went into the water. When he arrived at that boatyard, security footage captured what happened next. He did not run. He did not shout her name. He moved through the shadows quietly, peering behind objects, speaking to the security guard in a low voice, and he did not immediately mention his wife. That same night, after he had already spoken to the boatyard security guard, he called Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, to tell her what had happened. Carly later described that phone call in one word: monotone, relaxed, the voice of a man delivering information, not the voice of a man who had just lost his wife to the ocean. But here is what makes Brian's account harder to accept with every passing detail. At approximately 9:30 that evening, a witness positioned roughly 100 yards away on land reported hearing a massive splash coming from the direction of the Soulmate. Not a wave, not ambient noise. A splash significant enough to register, significant enough to remember, and significant enough to report to investigators. And then there is the camera footage. A resident near Lubber's quarters had a camera running that night. It captured light activity around the Soulmate area at midnight. Lights low near the waterline, consistent with dinghy movement. Lights higher up on deck, consistent with someone moving on board. At midnight. At the boat, Brian says, was sitting completely empty and dark all night long. Nobody was on that boat, he said. Nobody went back there that night. The footage says otherwise. Lynette Hooker was last seen wearing an aquamarine cover-up, a powder pink Apple Watch band, and a royal blue headscarf. She was on a short ride home across water she knew well. She never arrived. And the man who says he watched her disappear waited more than 8 hours to tell anyone she was gone. That is where this story begins. Before the investigation, before the search teams, before the federal criminal inquiry, Brian and Lynette Hooker were just a couple from western Michigan who decided to leave everything behind. In 2023, after more than 2 decades of marriage, they did something most people only talk about. They sold their life on land, bought a sailboat, named it the Soulmate, and pointed it toward open water. They documented everything on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube under the handle The Sailing Hookers. They built an audience watching them sail to New Orleans, Key West, Miami Beach, across the Caribbean, and eventually into the Bahamas. 2 people, 1 boat, endless horizon. That was the version they shared with the world. Lynette was the face of it, active, present, and genuinely joyful on camera. She posted sunsets, snorkeling trips, meals cooked on a solar oven, moments of quiet beauty on the water. Her last post before she disappeared showed boats sitting in calm, glassy water. The caption read, "Not going anywhere for a while." Days later, she was gone. Brian's online presence told a different story. His Facebook was almost entirely private. Of everything visible on his profile, only 2 posts referenced Lynette directly. One from before her disappearance, one from after. And then there is the record that exists away from social media entirely. In 2015, Kentwood, Michigan police responded to a domestic incident involving both Brian and Lynette. Each accused the other of assault. Brian was found intoxicated and bleeding from the nose. That is a documented police report. It is stated here as fact, not characterization. There is one more detail that sits quietly but carries weight. Lynette had booked a flight out of the Bahamas on March 11, 2026. She never used it. No explanation has been confirmed publicly for why she stayed. And in the days immediately before she vanished, she purchased healing oil for Brian's nail fungus. A small domestic act. Nothing about it suggests a woman in fear or a woman preparing to leave. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, and her father, Dan, are the family on the other side of this story, waiting for answers that have not come. Her daughter, Carly Aylesworth, has been the loudest voice demanding them. On the surface, this looked like a love story, but this is not where things started going wrong. April 5, 2026. Brian Hooker walks into the Marsh Harbour boatyard and reports his wife missing. The Royal Bahamas Police Force launches a search and rescue operation across the Sea of Abaco. They are looking for a woman in an aquamarine cover-up in open ocean. They are searching based entirely on the information Brian provided about where she went in and which direction the currents took her. 2 days later, on April 7th, The flotation device Brian said he threw toward Lynette is recovered along the shoreline. Lynette is not with it, not nearby, not anywhere the search teams are looking. Just the flotation device, alone on the beach, while the woman it was supposedly thrown to remains missing without a trace. April 8th. The United States Coast Guard opens a formal criminal investigation into Lynette's disappearance. That same day, Brian posts on Facebook. He describes himself as heartbroken over what he calls a boat accident in unpredictable seas. He says desperate attempts to reach her failed. He says finding her is his sole focus. Within hours of that post, Bahamian authorities arrest him. He is taken into custody and questioned repeatedly over the next 5 days. On April 13th, he is released. The deadline for Bahamian authorities to file formal charges passed without charges being filed. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell Butler, is clear and immediate in his response. Brian Hooker categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing in connection with his wife's disappearance. That position has not changed. It is carried through this entire story because it is a fact that belongs in every section. April 14th. Brian sits down with ABC News and states that his sole focus remains finding Lynette. He says he is staying, that he is not leaving until she is found. Hours after that interview ends, he boards a flight and leaves the Bahamas. His attorney says he needed to be with his terminally ill mother in the United States. He left without finding her. Not long after Brian departed the Bahamas aboard the Soulmate, sailing it toward the United States, Coast Guard investigative service agents intercepted the vessel approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. They seized it. The Soulmate, the boat at the center of this entire story, was impounded as evidence in an active criminal investigation. Physical evidence collected from the vessel was sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for forensic processing. That processing is ongoing, but the single most consequential development in this entire investigation did not come from the boat. It came from Brian's own devices. Investigators extracted GPS data from at least one electronic device belonging to Brian Hooker. What that data showed directly contradicts the account he gave to authorities. His device was on the water the night of April 4th. It recorded stops, specific locations in the Sea of Abaco, where the device paused before the movements continued, locations Brian never mentioned, locations that do not appear anywhere in the story he told investigators about drifting helplessly through the dark for 8 hours. A United States official confirmed directly to ABC News that what Brian told investigators does not match the GPS data recovered from his devices. The consequence of that confirmation is significant and cannot be overstated. The original Coast Guard search, the one launched immediately after Lynette was reported missing, was conducted in the wrong area. Not because investigators made an error, because the search was built around the information Brian provided. They searched where he said it happened. The GPS data says that is not where he was. Every search hour, every resource deployed in those first critical days, directed by a version of events that the data says did not happen, and that is when everything about this investigation changed direction. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button now. This case has more layers still to come, and we are not stopping until there are answers. On Tuesday, June 3, 2026, the 154-foot U.S. Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norval arrived in Marsh Harbour. On board were approximately 24 crew members, Coast Guard investigative service agents, a specialized dive team, an ROV, sonar equipment, aerial drones, and a cadaver dog named Maggie from Broward County, Florida, working alongside her handler, Chris. The vessel did not pause after docking. The over-the-horizon rigid inflatable boat was launched almost immediately, ferrying teams to their assigned positions across the water. The Royal Bahamas Police Force and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force were not bystanders in this operation. They showed up with their own rigid inflatable boats, transported agents between locations, attended coordination meetings, and remained active throughout. That coordination meeting was held at the Abaco Inn. Every agency working the case sat in the same room, the same inn where Brian and Lynette spent the evening of April 4th before leaving on that dinghy. When the meeting ended, every team dispersed back out into the Sea of Abaco with specific instructions and specific coordinates. 5 locations, approximately 5 miles of ocean and shoreline, each one flagged by the GPS data pulled from Brian's device. Location 1 is an abandoned harbor sitting just south of the Marsh Harbour boatyard. It is a derelict working marina, likely damaged further by Hurricane Dorian, filled with old barges and vessels lying on their sides. No lights, no activity, just dark water and wreckage. In the days immediately following April 4th, local residents observed vultures circling this specific area. Investigators factored that detail into their planning. On day 1 of the operation, the ROV was deployed through the water around the barges. On day 2, divers went in. To gain access beneath one of the abandoned barges, investigators used a conch hammer, a heavy tool typically used to break open conch shells, to breach the hull and create an opening for the ROV to enter the interior space. 2 scuba tanks were recovered during the search of this area. They appeared old and weathered, likely abandoned long before April 4th, and investigators do not currently believe they are connected to Brian or Lynette, but they were documented. Everything in those search areas is being documented. The GPS data places Brian's device at this location on the night Lynette disappeared. There are no lights here, no reason to pass through this space in the dark, unless you needed somewhere nobody was watching. Location 2 is Aunt Pat's Bay, the exact spot where the Soulmate sat anchored on the night of April 4th. Divers and the ROV examined the seafloor directly beneath and around the anchor position. The splash recorded at 9:30 that evening and the midnight light activity captured on camera both point to this location as a site where something happened that night. The seafloor here is where investigators believe answers may still be waiting. Location 3 is the Serenity area, south of the White Sound Channel on Elbow Cay, near what locals call the Burl Ives property, named after the late entertainer who once owned land there. The terrain is thick mangrove, the kind of dense coastal growth that cannot be searched from the air or from a boat on the water surface. It requires feet on the ground and a trained nose. On June 3rd, in overcast skies and intermittent rain, Maggie and Chris worked this area on foot, pushing through the mangrove edges and thicket. This was not the first time investigators showed interest in these specific mangroves. CGIS agents focused on this exact stretch of terrain during their earliest visits to the Bahamas, weeks before the dive team arrived. Location 4 is the one that carries the most immediate weight. The west side of Lubber's Quarters is a stretch of secluded beaches, dark at night, accessible by dinghy, isolated enough that movement there after dark would go completely unnoticed. On May 22nd, more than 3 weeks before the Coast Guard dive team arrived, boaters in the area off the western shore spotted something in approximately 4 to 5 feet of water, an article of clothing, aquamarine in color, matching the description of the cover-up Lynette was wearing the night she disappeared. The same cover-up Brian failed to mention when first responders asked him what his wife was wearing that night. He left it out completely. The boaters tried to retrieve the clothing, but strong wind and moving water prevented them from reaching it. What they did do was mark the exact GPS coordinates and report the sighting to investigators. When the search team arrived at those coordinates, the clothing was gone. Current or something else had moved it. That is a deeply significant development, because Brian's GPS device places him at this exact location on the night of April 4th. Clothing matching what Lynette was last seen wearing was spotted in shallow water at the precise location his device recorded. The west side of Lubber's quarters is being searched on foot in the water and with every available tool, because the data and the witness account point to the same place. Location 5 is the Marsh Harbour boatyard, where Brian arrived at 4 in the morning on April 5th. CGIS agents walked this location on June 3rd, physically retracing the route Brian's GPS recorded, rather than the route he described. The boatyard security footage, which captured his behavior upon arrival that morning, is part of the evidentiary record investigators are building step by step for eventual presentation in a formal legal proceeding. 2 items connected to Lynette remain missing and are active search targets across all 5 locations. Her bright green dry bag, which is buoyant by design and should float, has not been recovered anywhere in the Sea of Abaco in more than 60 days. The oar, Brian claims, broke its pin during his struggle that night has not been matched. An oar that washed up on Lubber's quarters was examined and does not appear to be the one Brian described. Both items are still out there, and the teams are still looking. While divers were in the water on June 3rd, Carly Aylesworth was in a different kind of waiting. Lynette's daughter confirmed directly to NBC News that she provided her DNA to the Coast Guard that same day to aid in the identification process. When asked about her mother, she kept it simple. "She has to be somewhere," Carly said. "All the help we can get is greatly appreciated." That is the statement of a daughter who has been waiting 61 days and has not stopped. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, also provided her DNA. Darlene has not heard from Brian since Lynette disappeared. She has not been kept regularly updated by authorities either. She is waiting with the same unanswered question she has carried since April 5th, with no direct line to the man who was the last person to see her daughter alive. Lynette's father, Dan, is the 3rd family member confirmed to have provided a DNA sample. 3 generations, 1 grandmother, 1 daughter, 1 father, all of them giving something of themselves so that when something is found, the identification process can begin immediately while the resources are still on the ground. The Coast Guard also obtained Lynette's dental records from her family. That detail is not incidental. Dental records become the primary identification tool when other methods are not possible. Having both DNA samples and dental records means investigators have built 2 completely separate identification pathways, both ready, both waiting. 61 days of waiting. Not one phone call from Brian to any of them asking whether the search has found anything. Not to Carly, not to Darlene, not to Dan. The man who told a national television audience that it would take a higher power to remove him from the Bahamas before he found his wife left the islands within hours of making that statement. The family he left behind is still looking. As of June 5, 2026, a United States official has confirmed to CBS News that this case is being investigated as a possible foreign murder of a U.S. national. That is the clearest and most direct official language used since Lynette Hooker disappeared 61 days ago. Not an accident. Not a missing persons case waiting for resolution. A possible murder investigation being run by federal authorities across 2 countries. The Soulmate has been moved from its initial impound location to a new facility in Florida where forensic examination continues. The FBI laboratory in Quantico is still processing physical evidence collected from the vessel. That work is ongoing and no results have been made public. A rumor circulated this week that Brian had left the United States entirely. Per sources close to the investigation, that is not accurate. Authorities say they know where Brian is. They have maintained awareness of his location throughout this investigation. Investigators do not lose track of the central figure in a possible murder case. The rumor is not something authorities believe to be true based on the information available to them. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His attorney, Terrell Butler, has stated consistently and clearly that he categorically denies any wrongdoing in connection with his wife's disappearance. That is his position, and it has not changed. What has changed is the scale of official attention on this case. Several outlets have drawn a direct comparison between this investigation and the 2005 disappearance of Natalie Holloway in Aruba. That case gripped the country for years and exposed every complexity that comes with pursuing justice for an American citizen who vanishes on foreign soil. Investigators, legal analysts, and journalists covering this case have noted it carries the same weight, the same international jurisdictional tension, and the same level of public scrutiny. It is the first case of this profile and visibility in 2 decades. If you have any information about the night of April 4th, about any of the 5 search locations, about the vessel, or anyone connected to this case, the Coast Guard Investigative Service has a TIPS application available on both iOS and Android. Submissions are anonymous. The link is in the description. If you want to support Lynette's family directly, the GoFundMe titled Lynette Hooker Missing in Bahamas is the place to do it. Carly and Darlene have carried this publicly for 61 days. Every bit of support matters. Lynette Hooker was an experienced sailor, a mother, and a woman who spent 3 years documenting her life on the water with honesty and joy. She called the ocean her happy place. She has been missing for 61 days. Federal divers are in that water right now. The GPS does not lie. And Kirian Wilson is not going anywhere until there are answers. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now. When those divers surface with something, you need to already be here. Share this video. The more people watching, the more pressure stays on this case. Lynette's family deserves that pressure, and they deserve those answers.